Stephen A. Smith just went off on Shedeur Sanders. If you've been following, Shedeur hasn't exactly had the smoothest run in the league, and now word is he's signing a deal outside the NFL. Let's just say Stephen A. isn't happy about it.
That is a crime. It is a disgrace.
But that's not all. He's also dropping some serious revelations about what's really been going on with Sanders. Let me break it down. The live confrontation that shook the NFL. Stephen A. Smith is never one to hold back his words, but what just happened on Instagram Live left fans shocked. In real time, millions of people watched as Stephen A. confronted Shedeur Sanders, the son of Hall of Famer D and Primetime Sanders, about his controversial new contract outside of the NFL. Shedeur isn't just another young quarterback chasing his dreams. He's the son of one of the most polarizing and legendary figures in football history. For Stephen A., who has spent decades calling out hypocrisy and cutting through the excuses of athletes, owners, and coaches alike, the fact that Shedeur bypassed the NFL system to sign an outside deal was enough to ignite a firestorm. Shedeur Sanders came into the league with more pressure than most rookies could ever imagine. Not only did scouts project him as a potential first-round talent, but many analysts believed he could end up being the face of a franchise. Yet instead of a dream NFL landing, Shedeur slid to the later rounds of the draft, leaving fans and insiders stunned. Stephen A. himself once said,
"And the fact that this brother hasn't been picked in the first 3 rounds, that is a crime. It is a disgrace."
Those weren't empty words. They were a warning, a foreshadowing, because what came next looked less like a football decision and more like what Stephen A. described as collusion between NFL owners to keep Shedeur from thriving in their system, all because of his father, Deion Sanders. When Shedeur decided to sign his new contract outside of the NFL framework, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire that was already burning. Critics immediately called it reckless. Insiders whispered that it was career suicide. But in Shedeur's eyes, this was about control, about taking his future out of the hands of NFL front offices that had already shown they didn't want him on their terms. Stephen A. Smith wasn't going to let that slide, not on his watch. When he went live with Shedeur, the confrontation got heated. We're talking about a man who has built his reputation on never mincing words and a young quarterback who is tired of being treated like a pawn in a game controlled by powerful executives. At one point, Stephen A. looked directly into the camera and told Shedeur,
"It's like understood. We don't want him because we don't like his daddy. We don't like his dad."
Do you understand how powerful that statement is? This wasn't just about Shedeur. This was about his bloodline, his last name, the fact that his father has spent years challenging the establishment, and now Shedeur is paying the price. This isn't just about football. This is about power, control, and whether or not a young black quarterback with talent, poise, and pedigree will ever be allowed to break free from the system that has chewed up and spit out so many before him. That's why Stephen A. went after him so hard on IG Live, because in his eyes, Shedeur wasn't just making a career decision, he was challenging the very fabric of the NFL. While Stephen A. has always been quick to criticize NFL ownership for their double standards, on this night, he turned that same energy towards Shedeur himself. It was almost as if he was saying, if you want to fight the machine, you better be ready for the consequences. Remember, this is the same league that blackballed Colin Kaepernick for kneeling during the national anthem, the same league that, as Stephen A. himself pointed out, handed every owner a $246 million check while still blaming Kaepernick for costing them millions. So the message was clear. The NFL doesn't forgive, and it sure as hell doesn't forget. But Shedeur wasn't backing down. He pushed back, defending his decision, saying he wasn't about to let his destiny be dictated by a group of men who already showed they didn't believe in him. And when he said it, you could hear the frustration, the same frustration his father has carried for years.
That if he didn't like the situation his son was in, he was going to pull him up out of there. Stuff like that. On the NFL level, can't do that.
Meanwhile, fans in the comments were losing their minds. Some called Stephen A. a hypocrite. Others said Shedeur was throwing his career away. And a few brave voices typed what everyone was really thinking, that maybe this was exactly what the NFL was afraid of. Because if Shedeur Sanders succeeds outside of their system, it exposes the truth they've worked so hard to hide, that their monopoly on football talent isn't as unshakable as they want us to believe. This IG Live wasn't just a confrontation. It was a symbol of the generational clash between an old guard that believes in playing the game by the rules of billionaires and a new wave of athletes who are willing to risk it all for independence. The fallout and the deeper truth. The IG Live was supposed to be a quick conversation. At least that's what fans thought when the notification popped up on their phones. Stephen A. Smith is live with Shedeur Sanders, but instead of a casual back and forth, viewers quickly realized they were watching a career-defining showdown unfold in real time. The fallout was immediate, viral, and messy. Within minutes, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube were flooded with re-uploads, reaction videos, and commentary. Hashtags like #Shedeur Sanders, #Stephen A, and #NFlexPose trended overnight. But it wasn't just the words, it was was the timing. Shedeur had just finalized a multi-million-dollar contract outside of NFL structures, reportedly tied to endorsements, media deals, and opportunities that went beyond just football. It was the kind of contract that no fifth-round rookie in NFL history had ever been offered, and that made owners nervous. Because what happens if Shedeur Sanders doesn't need the NFL to succeed? What happens if other players follow his lead? Suddenly, the league's control over young talent begins to crack. Fans expected Stephen A. to dominate the conversation. He's a seasoned broadcaster after all. But Shedeur, calm yet firm, didn't back down. He reminded everyone that his entire life had been spent under a microscope. From dominating at Jackson State to putting Colorado back on the map with his father as head coach, Shedeur wasn't new to pressure. And when Stephen A. pushed him about running away from the NFL system, Shedeur clapped back. If the NFL didn't want me, then why should I give them control over me? They had their chance. I'm not begging for a seat at their table. I'm building my own. The comment section blew up. Supporters flooded with fire emojis and phrases like, "Talk your talk," while critics typed angrily, "You'll regret this. Nobody beats the NFL." By the next morning, sports outlets across the nation picked up the story. Skip Bayless called it the boldest move we've ever seen from a rookie quarterback. Shannon Sharp compared it to what Colin Kaepernick faced when his activism collided with ownership interests. ESPN replayed the IG Live clip nearly every hour, but the most chilling reaction came from insiders. Anonymous NFL executives reportedly told journalists that Shedeur had burned bridges and would never play meaningful downs in the league again. It was eerily reminiscent of what happened during the draft. Remember, Shedeur wasn't just overlooked, he was humiliated by being left to fall all the way to the later rounds despite being labeled a top 20 talent by Mel Kiper Jr. Stephen A. himself had predicted that the draft snub wasn't about talent, it was about politics. And now, by confronting Shedeur so openly, he forced the NFL's dirty laundry into the spotlight again. This wasn't just about Shedeur, it was about his father, Deion Sanders. Deion has always been larger than life. Hall of Fame cornerback, Super Bowl champion, TV personality, and now a college coach who turned Colorado into a media circus. Owners already hated how much attention he commanded.
Usually injuries or off-the-field issues force you to plummet, none of which applies to Shedeur Sanders.
Stephen A. connected the dots on IG Live, saying out loud what executives have whispered for months, that Shedeur was being punished because of who his father is. Think about that for a second. The NFL, a league that prides itself on being a meritocracy, was accused of blackballing a young QB not because of his ability, but because of his last name. That's bigger than football. That's systemic. That's the kind of accusation that makes fans question everything. NFL franchises have bent over backwards to give chances to players with DUIs, assault charges, and all kinds of off-field issues. Yet Shedeur Sanders, who has no history of legal trouble, no behavioral concerns, and nothing but production on the field, was being treated like a problem child. Why? Because his father once dared to say he wanted some control over his son's career path.
I think where they made a huge mistake is that everyone is going to think collusion.
Right.
Because you can't say there's 5 quarterbacks in the draft that were better than Shedeur Sanders.
And that's hypocrisy. Teams are fine overlooking DUIs and locker room meltdowns, but the idea of a father advocating for his son, suddenly that's too much trouble. As the IG Live replay spread, fans were split right down the middle. Team Shedeur argued that he was blazing a new trail, carving out freedom from an NFL system designed to control players. They compared him to pioneers in music and business who refused to sell out. Team Stephen A. insisted that Shedeur was making a huge mistake, throwing away the prestige and legacy of playing in the NFL for quick money and short-term clout. Perhaps the most telling reaction was the one that didn't happen. The NFL itself stayed silent. No press release, no comment, no attempt to spin the narrative. And that silence spoke louder than any statement could. It was as if the league knew that acknowledging Shedeur's contract or Stephen A.'s explosive comments would only legitimize the controversy. But silence doesn't erase perception. And the perception growing among fans was this: the NFL was scared.
And then we have to take into reality what we saw. Shedeur Sanders looked very bad. Very bad.
By the end of the week, Shedeur Sanders had gone from overlooked rookie to one of the most talked about names in sports. He had done what few could ever imagine, forced the most powerful sports league in America into the shadows of a conversation it couldn't control. While Stephen A. thought he was holding Shedeur accountable, what he really did was spotlight the cracks in the NFL's armor, the hate machine, and what it really means. If you think the IG Live confrontation was the end of the story, you're wrong, because what came after was something even more revealing: the systematic hate campaign that followed Shedeur Sanders everywhere he went. And when you examine why so many people pile onto Shedeur, you start to see a pattern that goes far deeper than football. Let's break down why Shedeur Sanders gets more hate than almost any other young quarterback in recent memory. First, there's the silver spoon narrative. One of the loudest arguments against Shedeur is that he had everything handed to him. From the moment he stepped on the field, critics pointed to his father, Deion Sanders, and claimed Shedeur never had to grind like other players. They say every opportunity, from Jackson State to Colorado, was orchestrated by Primetime himself. But here's the hypocrisy. NFL franchises routinely draft quarterbacks who come from football dynasties. The Manning brothers, Patrick Mahomes' father being a pro athlete, even the Bosa family, all celebrated for their pedigree. So why is Shedeur being labeled a Nepo baby, while others are praised for having NFL bloodlines? The answer is uncomfortable, because his last name is Sanders, and because Deion has never played by the NFL's unwritten rules of silence and obedience. Then came the draft day humiliation. The NFL draft was a national spectacle, and Shedeur Sanders became its biggest storyline for all the wrong reasons. Analysts had him projected as a first-round pick, even labeling him a top 20 talent. Yet he wasn't picked until the later rounds. That's not just a fall, that's a free fall. Fans who didn't know the politics behind the scenes assumed one thing: he must not be that good. So from the start of his pro career, Shedeur was fighting uphill against the narrative that he was overhyped. And when he had one bad preseason performance, 3 completions, 5 sacks, and 14 yards, critics jumped at the chance to scream, "See, we told you so." Let's be honest, people hate when athletes get paid before proving themselves. Shedeur's new contract outside the NFL was reportedly worth more than some active NFL rookies' entire deals. And the fact that a 5th-round pick could secure that kind of money enraged traditionalists. In their minds, he was cashing out before putting in the work. They saw it as arrogance, a slap in the face to the league. But here's the truth: Shedeur is just playing the same game owners play. They leverage players for profit every single day. He's just flipping the script, making sure he benefits this time. And that's exactly why the hate burns so hot. Because deep down, people don't hate Shedeur. They hate that he outsmarted the system. There's also the arrogance tag. This one is straight out of the NFL's playbook. Before the draft, anonymous scouts whispered about Shedeur being too brash and not coachable. Some even claimed his combine interviews turned off executives. But here's the kicker: those same executives praised white quarterbacks in the past for having swagger or confidence. When Joe Burrow shows swagger, it's leadership. When Shedeur does it, it's arrogance.
But also, you mentioned the fact that why would they sabotage an NFL Legends player? I think that's part of it too.
Let's not forget, every ounce of hate Shedeur gets is multiplied by his father's presence. Deion Sanders isn't just a dad. He's a Hall of Famer, a cultural icon, and one of the most unapologetic personalities in sports history. He's also a man who has never hesitated to call out hypocrisy, whether in the NFL, NCAA, or media. Owners don't like being challenged. They don't like the idea of a father openly demanding control over his son's career path. And so Shedeur gets caught in the crossfire of his father's reputation. The saddest truth of all, a lot of fans want Shedeur to fail. Why? Because it validates their worldview. If he succeeds, it proves that the NFL system can be bypassed, that legacy and independence can win. But if he fails, it proves the haters right, that you can't beat the machine.
Here's the sad part about what we saw this weekend. That may be the only time we see Shedeur Sanders on the NFL field this year. That will be our lasting memory.
Stephen A. even hinted at this during First Take. That's the narrative fans cling to. And until Shedeur proves otherwise, they'll use every misstep to fuel the hate. So why all the hate? It's not just one reason. That's all of it. He's Deion's son. He didn't play by the rules. He got money before success. He carries himself with confidence. He challenges the NFL's power. That combination makes him a lightning rod. And while most young quarterbacks are given time to grow, Shedeur Sanders is being judged in real time, under a microscope, by millions of people waiting for him to trip. But here's the twist: hate isn't always a curse. Sometimes it's fuel. And if Shedeur can turn that hate into motivation, he just might flip the script on everyone rooting against him. Because history tells us one thing: the more they hate, the sweeter the victory becomes when you prove them wrong. If there's one thing we've learned from this saga, it's that Stephen A. Smith is never afraid to say what everyone else is too scared to say. That IG Live moment with Shedeur Sanders wasn't an exception. It was the latest chapter in a career built on confrontation, accountability, and putting people on blast when the rest of the sports world looks the other way. For decades, Stephen A. has called out athletes, owners, coaches, and executives on their misconduct, sometimes making enemies, always making headlines. Oh, Tom Brady, the greatest of all time, or so many would have you believe. But Stephen A. Smith isn't buying it. He's consistently questioned Brady's greatness, arguing that his team's strong defense has played a significant role in his success. In a 2020 interview with ESPN, Stephen A. stated, "Tom Brady's not the greatest quarterback of all time. I think he's been blessed with the circumstances that he's played in." Stephen A.'s criticism of Brady stems from his belief that the Patriots dynasty was built built on more than just Brady's quarterbacking. He points to the team's consistent defensive performances and the coaching prowess of Bill Belichick as key factors in their success. While many NFL fans and analysts disagree with Stephen A.'s assessment, his opinions have sparked heated debates and discussions. But let's be real, Stephen A.'s beef with Tom Brady goes deeper than just football. He's been vocal about his disdain for Brady's TB12 lifestyle and his perceived lack of humility. In a 2017 episode of First Take, Stephen A. said, "Tom Brady's got to be kidding me with this TB12 stuff. He's not invincible. He's not a superhero." Stephen A.'s criticism of Brady's TB12 lifestyle is rooted in his skepticism about the effectiveness of Brady's nutrition and fitness plan. Many experts have questioned the scientific basis of Brady's diet, and Stephen A. believes that Brady's reliance on it is overhyped. "I don't think Tom Brady's TB12 lifestyle is the reason he's still playing at a high level," Stephen A. said in a 2020 interview. "I think it's because he's still got the skills, still got the talent, and still got the drive to succeed." Aaron Rodgers is another NFL icon who's faced Stephen A. to West scrutiny. Despite being a two-time NFL MVP and leading the Green Bay Packers to a Super Bowl victory, Stephen A. has questioned Rodgers' leadership skills and ability to perform under pressure. In a 2019 episode of First Take, Stephen A. said, "Aaron Rodgers is not the leader that Tom Brady is. He's not the guy that can take over a game like Tom Brady can." Stephen A.'s criticism of Rodgers centers around his perceived lack of leadership and inability to elevate his team's performance in critical situations. While Rodgers has undoubtedly demonstrated exceptional quarterbacking skills, Stephen A. believes that his leadership style and decision-making on the field are areas for improvement. But what's really going on here? Is Stephen A. just trying to stir up controversy, or does he genuinely believe that Rodgers isn't cut out for the big stage? Whatever the reason, Stephen A.'s opinions have sparked a lively debate among NFL fans. Odell Beckham Jr. is a talented wide receiver who's played for several teams, including the New York Giants and Cleveland Browns. However, Stephen A. has consistently questioned OBJ's work ethic and dedication to the game. In a 2019 interview with ESPN, Stephen A. stated, "Odell Beckham Jr. is a guy who's got a lot of talent, but he's got to prove himself to me as a worker." Stephen A.'s criticism of OBJ stems from his perception that the receiver hasn't consistently demonstrated a strong work ethic or dedication to improving his craft. While OBJ has undoubtedly shown flashes of brilliance on the field, Stephen A. believes that he needs to put in more effort to reach his full potential. But let's be real, OBJ's off-field antics haven't exactly helped his case. From his high-profile relationships to his lavish lifestyle, OBJ's personal life has been subject to scrutiny. Stephen A.'s opinions on OBJ's work ethic are just the latest salvo in a long-standing debate about the receiver's commitment to the game. Stephen A.'s opinion on Kaepernick's protest reflects his belief that athletes should respect the flag and the national anthem. While many people agree with Stephen A.'s stance, others argue that Kaepernick's actions were a legitimate form of peaceful protest against social injustice. The debate surrounding Kaepernick's protest has been intense, with many NFL players and personalities taking sides. Stephen A.'s opinions on the issue have been particularly polarizing, with some praising his candor and others criticizing him for being insensitive to the issues Kaepernick was trying to raise awareness about. Cam Newton is a talented quarterback who's led the Carolina Panthers to several playoff appearances. However, Stephen A. has questioned Newton's leadership skills and ability to perform under pressure. In a 2016 episode of First Take, Stephen A. said, "Cam Newton is a guy who's got a lot of talent, but he's got to prove himself to me as a leader." Stephen A.'s criticism of Newton centers around his perceived lack of leadership and inability to elevate his team's performance in critical situations. While Newton has undoubtedly demonstrated exceptional athleticism and quarterbacking skills, Stephen A. believes that his leadership style and decision-making on the field are areas for improvement. Antonio Brown is a talented wide receiver who's played for several teams, including the Pittsburgh Steelers and Oakland Raiders. However, Stephen A. has consistently questioned AB's commitment to his teams and criticized his off-field antics. In a 2019 episode of First Take, Stephen A. said, "Antonio Brown is a guy who's got a lot of talent, but he's got a lot of drama." Stephen A.'s criticism of AB stems from his perception that the receiver's off-field antics have overshadowed his on-field performance. From his feud with Ben Roethlisberger to his tumultuous departure from the Steelers, AB's personal life has been subject to scrutiny. Stephen A. believes that AB needs to focus on his football and leave the drama off the field. Josh Allen is a young quarterback who's led the Buffalo Bills to several playoff appearances. However, Stephen A. has questioned Allen's consistency and ability to lead his team to a Super Bowl victory. In a 2020 episode of First Take, Stephen A. said, "Josh Allen's got a lot of talent, but he's got to prove himself to me as a consistent quarterback." Stephen A.'s criticism of Allen centers around his perceived inconsistency on the field. While Allen has shown flashes of brilliance, Stephen A. believes that he needs to demonstrate more consistency and leadership to be become a top-tier quarterback. Dak Prescott is a talented quarterback who's led the Dallas Cowboys to several playoff appearances. However, Stephen A. has questioned Prescott's leadership skills and criticized his contract negotiations. In a 2020 episode of First Take, Stephen A. said, "Dak Prescott's got to prove himself to me as a leader. He's got to show me that he's worth the money." Stephen A.'s criticism of Prescott stems from his perception that the quarterback's contract negotiations have been handled poorly. Stephen A. believes that Prescott needs to demonstrate more leadership and consistency on the field to justify his contract demands. Whether it's Tom Brady's GOAT status, Aaron Rodgers' leadership skills, or Odell Beckham Jr.'s work ethic, Stephen A. is always willing to share his opinions and spark debate. And let's be real, that's what makes him so compelling to watch. As he continues to cover the NFL and share his opinions, Stephen A. will undoubtedly remain a polarizing figure in the sports world. But whether you love him or hate him, one thing's for sure: Stephen A. Smith is a force to be reckoned with, and his opinions will continue. This is his brand. This is who he is. Stephen A. doesn't pull punches, he doesn't sugarcoat, and he doesn't protect feelings. So when Shedeur Sanders decided to bypass the NFL system and chase an outside contract, it was inevitable that Stephen A. would confront him. Not because he hates Shedeur, but because Stephen A. believes in shining a light on what he sees as bad decisions or hypocrisy, even if it means putting a 22-year-old rookie on the hot seat in front of millions. In the end, Shedeur Sanders' scandals and controversies may fade, but Stephen A.'s role in this saga proves one thing: as long as there are athletes making bold moves, there will always be Stephen A. Smith ready to call them out, no matter how uncomfortable the truth may be. So here's the final question: will Shedeur Sanders collapse under the weight of all this hate, or will he turn into the one player who finally breaks the NFL's iron grip on its talent pipeline? Because if he succeeds outside the system, he won't just silence the haters, he'll change football forever. And that's why this confrontation wasn't just IG Live drama, it was history in the making. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.